Right, so obstructive sleep apnea is a very prevalent breathing disorder in our community. And of middle-aged adults globally, 1 billion are estimated to have obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA for short. So obstructive sleep apnea is characterised by relaxation of the muscles of the upper airway during sleep. And this can cause the airway to narrow and cause a cessation in breathing. A partial cessation in breathing is termed, if I can get this to work, is termed a hypopnea. A complete cessation in breathing is termed an apnea. Now, these events can vary in duration from about 10 seconds to even more than 2 minutes, and they're associated with a decrease in oxygen and increase in carbon dioxide levels. Now, this can trigger a cascade of physiological events, which can include an arousal from sleep, which is a change from a deep to a light stage of sleep. This in turn can activate your sympathetic nervous system, which can bring about a surge in blood pressure. Now, this trace here represents a blood pressure recording, and each of these peaks represents a surge in blood pressure immediately after an obstructive event. And these surges in blood pressure over time are thought to contribute to high blood pressure in patients with OSA. Current research is trying to understand the characteristics of those most at risk and what are the underlying mechanisms. One aspect of sleep that has been relatively overlooked in this population is sleep regularity, and this is important because OSA disrupts sleep. So this is an example of a regular sleeper, and on the y-axis we have days, and on the x-axis we have time. So we can see this person throughout the week is going to bed, waking up fairly similar times. So we have a metric to quantify this regularity, and we quantify this as a score of 100. So they're sleeping really well. When we compare this to someone with irregular sleep, and their sleep is fragmented throughout the week or sleep at different times, it would be a lower sleep regularity score. Now, recent research has associated poor regularity in sleep with also high risk of high blood pressure and cardiovascular diseases. So we know that obstructive sleep apnea is linked to high blood pressure, and that now studies are showing that sleep regularity is also linked. We wanted to determine whether sleep regularity modifies this association. Or in other words, does having both sleep apnea and poor sleep regularity further increase your risk of having high blood pressure? So we investigated this for the first time in the Generation 1 participants from the Raine study. And between 2015 and 2017, they had their own follow-up study, which included an overnight sleep study in the laboratory at the Centre for Sleep Science here at UWA to diagnose OSA. They also had actigraphy monitoring, which is a watch-like device to measure activity patterns in the home setting for about a week, blood pressure measurements, and they filled out a number of questionnaires, which included questions about doctor-diagnosed hypertension or high blood pressure. So we quantified sleep regularity using this metric called Sleep Regularity Index. And as I said before, a score of 100 represents a very regular sleeper. So for the purposes of our analysis, we categorised the scores based on tertiles. So the lowest tertile would be a severely irregular sleeper, the middle a mildly irregular sleeper, and the highest tertile a regular sleeper. So we excluded people who were shift workers as they have very regular sleep schedules, and people with missing data, and also if they did not wear the watch for more than 4 days, we excluded that data. So we had 58% female, of which 91% were all Caucasian and 57 years of age on average. So we first assessed the relationship between OSA and sleep regularity using logistic regression, and we adjusted for a number of covariates. So from this graph, we can see on the y-axis the odds ratio for OSA, and on the x-axis the sleep regularity groups. So we saw that the people in the mildly irregular and severely irregular groups had almost 2 times the odds of having obstructive sleep apnea compared to the regular sleepers, and this was significant. We then assessed the association between high blood pressure and OSA and by sleep regularity group. So in this graph, this represents people with no obstructive sleep apnea, and on the y-axis we now have odds for high blood pressure, and on the x-axis, the sleep regularity group. So we found that there was no difference in the risk for having high blood pressure amongst the different sleep regularity groups. But then we looked at just those with sleep apnea, and we saw that in the mildly irregular group, there was a significantly increased risk of having high blood pressure. And in the severely irregular, there was a trend for increased blood pressure, so it was almost significant. So in summary, we know that obstructive sleep apnea is linked to increased risk of high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 cause of mortality in Australia and globally. Sleep regularity represents potentially an important health target. As we've shown in this study, sleep regularity may be associated with irregular sleep patterns, and this may increase the risk of high blood pressure. So potentially improving sleep regularity might be an important modifiable lifestyle factor in line with other things such as smoking, alcohol, diet, and activity. Also, the rise in popularity of wristwatches makes tracking sleep regularity very easily, as perhaps many of us today have these watches that we wear and are able to keep a record of our sleep patterns and easily be able to monitor and track this. So lastly, I would like to acknowledge my supervisors, collaborators, and of course the Raine study participants and all the staff, and the funding we receive from the NHMRC for a lot of the data presented here, and of course all the Western Australian universities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shelley. That was a lovely presentation. Did you have any measure of anxiety or depression in relation to these findings, which might affect sleep regularity and blood pressure?
Yes, so we do have that data, which was collected on questionnaire. I haven't looked at it, but that would certainly be something interesting to have a look to see how that might affect these relationships. And as this is cross-sectional, we don't know for sure whether all the things that are contributing to high blood pressure, so of course there's lots of other factors, so it'd be good to look at that as an additional contributor.
Hello, thanks. This is not really related to research, but how modifiable is this regularity? So if we decide to change, is that something we can do easily or people resistant?
Yeah, so that's quite difficult. I suppose what we've done in this population is we've excluded shift workers, so people who are forced to sleep outside the normal hours. So perhaps just trying to keep a regular regime, so having that bedtime, trying to go to bed at a consistent time and having a routine and waking up consistently at about the same time every day might improve your sleep health and potentially health outcomes. So that's another area of research. How do we implement this? So future work to do.